Good evening. Well, I'm a bit peeved this evening. I've been up on the roof. Sunset is here. I'm in Gibraltar. And I was sitting on the roof of the boat and I was making a video. And it's a little bit breezy up there, a bit of wind. So I thought I'd be clever. And I used one of these little microphones connected to the phone. And Bob's your uncle, very professional. What? Well, the whole thing came out with no sound. That's how good it was. So completely wasted my time sitting up there talking about nothing like this. So I can't upload that, can I? Anyway, so down in the studio I am, and I'm not really sat outside RAF Scampton. This is a green screen, you can tell. Anyway, I was going to talk about the RAF base at Scampton. Okay, it's for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's a bomber squadron. You know, it's base. I think the Dam Busters. In fact, I'm sure the Dam Busters were. This is where they were based during the war when they did their legendary feat of airmanship, flying all the way to blow up the dams. They did it from here. There's even a pub down the road there called the Dam Buster or something like that. 617 Squadron, very famous RAF squadron based here. But they're going to close it. But that's all in the news at the moment. They're going to close it. It's been left abandoned really for quite a while, and they've got a beautiful long runway. In fact, there's a Roman road at the end of it, the A1, which goes straight through the runway because they wanted to extend the runway for V bombers and things. They were doing trips to Russia in the Cold War and things like that. So they built the bypass around the end of the runway and then back onto the A1. But you can still, if you go on Google Maps, you can still see where the A1 used to go. What it does, it still goes right through the end of the runway. Fascinating. But the big news today is they're gonna house immigrants here or something like that. Well, it's a very sad thing that Air Force bases have to close, but you know, as they have less and less money to spend and the equipment is more and more expensive, they have to downsize and do things, and it's a big shame. Tangmere, for example, was a massive RAF base during the Battle of Britain. That's gone. You can't even find it anymore. It's gone. There's a little bit of runway left. There's a Tangmere museum somewhere in the corner. It's all gone. It's very sad. Scampton is going, and Manston, RAF Manston, that was a big RAF base, huge long runway, right on the end of Kent there, and that's gone. No more. And it's very sad, but that's time moves on. Time really does move on. I did a few flights with the Lancaster from here, and the Wellington bomber and stuff like that in VR, because there are no Wellington bombers, as you know. There's none left anywhere. In fact, the only one that they've got that's complete was were found on the bottom of Loch Ness. It ditched there during the war and sank, and all the rest of them got scrapped, broken up, whatever happened to them, they've all gone. And then they found this one on the bottom of Loch Ness. They pulled it up, and it's in the Imperial War Museum, I think. Duxford, is it Duxford? Not sure, but it's out in VR. You can actually download it for free, and you can fly it, and it's not very impressive, but you know, it was in its day. I mean, that's what they did. That's what they were. And I was explaining on the roof that you get a lot of snobbery in aviation. I'm sitting on a boat right now with a looking at Gibraltar, and people think that I'm into boats, and I'm not. My wife is into boats. Quite often the dude says, "Oh, let's get into boats, darling. What do you think?" And the wife's like that. Sometimes they go along and humour the husband, don't they? And they say there's two good days with a boat: the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Well, that's not actually true, because we've had a lot of years. We brought our kids up on this boat. It's great. We live in the house in the winter, and then we move onto the boat as soon as the summer comes, and we're there enjoying it all summer. It's fantastic. It's like a caravan, but bigger. It's the pikey in me, I suppose. That makes. But I enjoy living on the boat. It's great. I'm actually a commercial captain. I've been a commercial captain driving a dolphin boat with about 25 passengers for 15 years, last 15 years, although I have had the last year off due to ill health. But there's a lot of snobbery in the boat world. There's snobbery. People with sails don't want to talk to people with motorboats, and you can imagine. And it's the same in aviation. It's exactly the same in aviation. We get fixed wing pilots. They think, great, got a pilot's license, but that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. That's all. There's all kinds of ratings that go on top of that, including seaplane ratings, night ratings, instrument weather ratings, instrument ratings, which are different to instrument weather ratings. And then there's branch off multi-engine ratings, commercial pilots, airline transport pilots. Like, so they're all in different little cliques. Some of them are quite sensible and they don't sneer at other people, but some do. You'll get those kind of people. And then you get your tailwheel pilots who tailwheels are a bit more tricky to fly, especially. Well, they're not tricky to fly; they're just tricky to land and take off. That's the truth of it. They have to take off and land into wind, because back in the old days they just took off and landed into wind and that was it. But today we've got runways in different directions, you've got crosswinds, you've got all kinds of things to mess you up. Because if you just took off and landed into wind on the grass, you'd be fine in a tailwheel every time. But you start doing it in a crosswind and you may find that you will roll the airplane into a ball and be very embarrassed climbing out the wreckage. They don't make tailwheels anymore because they're not as safe as nose wheels, and it takes a lot more skill to control a tailwheel on the ground handling and landing for sure. They ground loop, they spin round, they dig wingtips in, they flip over. There's all kinds of things can go badly wrong with a tailwheel that won't go wrong with a nose wheel aeroplane. So once you pass your test in your nose wheel, if you want to fly tailwheels, you have to go off and do a course, a tailwheel conversion course. Although your license does allow you to fly it, you're not advised to get in a tailwheel and try and fly it without training. But then you get tailwheel pilots who think, I won't fly one of those spam cans. It's true. I've heard it with my own ears, and I think, well, I fly tailwheels as well, and I don't get all snobby and up my own ass about spam cans, And the beauty of VR, of course, is VR. You can download any kind of plane you want. All the famous planes are there. You can download Messerschmitts and Spitfires and things if you want, and you can learn how to ground handle them in real time and weather, and you can crash them as many times as you want. It doesn't matter. You just press restart and you get a brand new fixed plane. But they are a handful, and the more powerful they are, the more difficult they are. So, in summing it all up, the most difficult aeroplanes, the most likely ones to crash in, are tailwheels, especially powerful tailwheels like Spitfires and Messerschmitt 109s, because to make it even worse, the undercarriage is so much narrower. So you're gonna ground loop it a lot easier than you will one with wide undercarriage. You'll notice that later, the last really of the big tailwheel fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolt, the Corsair, they had something like 2,000 horsepower engines. They were enormous, very powerful, but they had very, very wide undercarriage because they didn't want the narrow undercarriage. They didn't want that because too many had crashed. And I think in the Battle of Britain, Germans lost more 109s to ground accidents than got shot down, purely because it was a bad design. Same with the Spitfire. So when the Americans designed the P-51, which was everything the Spitfire wasn't, they said, we don't want silly narrow undercarriage, we want wide undercarriage, because we don't want to lose loads of aeroplanes needlessly because they're really expensive. So that's precisely what happened. And then we moved on to nose wheels. Everything today is nose wheel. There's nothing. I don't think anyone produces tail wheels that I can think of off the top of my head. There was the Pilatus Porter, but I don't think they make them anymore. There is a company in America that buys up old DC-3s and completely zero times the airframe, puts gas turbines in them, all new avionics. So you're getting a brand new airplane, but it's 70, 80 years old, really. although it's had a lot of modifications. But that's the only tail wheel I can think of that's still in production, and that's not really in production. That's revamping something that's already there, because they're good at getting in and out of short strips. That's the gist of it. There's nothing else that can take 3.5 tons into and out of rough strips in Africa and South America, places like that. So that there is a market for it still, but it's very limited. Very limited. Everything is nose wheel. Everything these days, and there's a jolly good reason for that. And because of the problem with taking off and landing into wind, if you look at wartime airfields, they had 3 runways in a triangle. So whichever way the wind was blowing, there must have been one runway that was pointed into wind, more or less, within the crosswind limits. And even then, it was dodgy, you know. And a good pilot doesn't push the aircraft to its limits. A good pilot knows the limits of the aircraft and doesn't push it to the limits, because they know if you do push it to the limits, you're going to die. So a good pilot, one that survived, like you look at during the war, the Messerschmitt 109 was the highest scoring fighter. Well, don't forget, Germans took everybody on in the whole world, didn't they? So there was more fighting going on than any other country, really. So that's why they had the highest score. And the highest scoring aces knew the aeroplane very well, and they knew not to mess with it. It's got pop-out slots on the front of the wings. And I've flown it in VR. And in VR, these models that they design are very, very accurate. You know, they're as accurate as you can get a model to the actual aeroplane. So it will fly and handle just like the real thing. We're flying in real time. We're flying in real weather. So the temperature and the pressures, everything's the same. And you can't honk a 109 around and land it. No, it flicks out on you and you lose it. Low speed, no chance. And you've got to be going as slow as you can to land. That's the trick. You don't want to touch down going too fast, because you bounce and bounce and bounce, and you go through the fence at the end. You want to be coming in at the lowest speed you can. Give yourself a 10 knot safety margin above the stall, because you want to stall it right onto the ground and stop it as soon as you can. So the last thing you want to be doing is coming in low and slow, honking it around, and then trying to land it like you can a lot of other airplanes. Not with the 109, not even with the pop-out slots. I've tried it, and I've come a cropper many times in the circuit coming into land, because it's just that. The trick with the 109 is you bring it in on long finals, get yourself all nicely set up, get everything ready, bring yourself in at a nice speed, and you need to give yourself that 10 knot safety margin, and then put it down. Nice 3-point landing. Make sure your tail wheel locks on, and it's fine. It's fine. And if you work within those parameters, but people that will show off and honk it around, caught out Ray Hanna's son, that very thing, that killed him. And he was a very experienced pilot, very experienced. And I'd say that was what killed him. The slots on the wings are a good idea. Popping out, just saw my instrument panel come up then on the, see there, it's on the boat. The green screen from Scampton. It doesn't go all the way around there. Yeah, the slots popping out mean that the wing can fly at a slower speed. So it's a great idea in theory, but I think the Germans must have put that in later to try and alleviate the problem that they were having. The 108 was a really great aeroplane, really nice. You could honk that around, but it had a wider fuselage, which gave it a wider wheelbase for the wheels as well, which was another advantage. But the 109 was a much narrower fuselage, so a much narrower undercarriage, and it just didn't work. The 108 did work. It was really good. The 109 could have been better, I think, is the best way I can put it. You noticed the Focke-Wulf 190 when that came out, it had much wider undercarriage, so it got rid of most of those ground looping accidents, ground handling accidents. Another of it is, yes, you get snobbery everywhere. And then when you move on to helicopters, you see you get helicopter part. Helicopters are a very different thing to fly. And it takes about 6 hours to get the hang of the helicopter, because you've got your cyclic, you've got your collective, which is your up and down lever, and you've got your rudder pedals, and you've got to work all three at the same time. So you start off with just the joystick, flying about forwards and backwards, and you get the hang of that. And then the instructor will say, right, I'll take the joystick. You work the cyclic, which is the up and down lever, okay? So you lift the thing up, the helicopter rises, you lower it, helicopter descends, but then there's tricks that you have to learn. You don't make big sudden movements. It's all very, very small, very slight movements. When you want to come down, of course, if you lower the lever all the way to the bottom, the thing's going to come down like a brick. And then when you start to rise it to slow your descent rate, if you do it too quick or you leave it too late, helicopter's going to spank in. You're going to get blade stall, and it's just going to spank in. So you got to learn these limitations. It's like people said to me, I'd never get in a Robinson R22. It's dangerous. Well, lots of people have crashed and killed themselves in R22s, but there's nothing wrong with the Robinson R22. Okay, I personally wouldn't fly one. Okay, but I'm not slagging the aircraft off. It's very good at what it is, and if you push it outside of those limits, I've seen some very, very skillful people flying R22s. Just push that over there a bit more. Seen some very skillful people flying R22s, especially out in Australia, sheep farmers and things like that. Fantastic. They can throw those things around incredibly. But you have to stick within your limitations of your aircraft. Because no matter how good you are, the aircraft isn't that good. And if you push beyond then you're going to come unstuck and you're going to die. That's just a fact. Most of the people who've died in Robinsons, I think, have made a mistake. They've pushed the aircraft beyond what it was designed to do. It's very good as a cheap, and it's not cheap, but as a training helicopter, it's excellent because it's one of the cheapest you can get. I think when Fiona was having helicopter lessons, we were looking at £250 an hour plus VAT plus landing fees, and that was going back 25 years, more, nearly 30 years. So I don't know what it is today. Be a lot more than that today. But helicopters are super, super expensive things, and nobody can afford. Well, very few people can afford. To lash out, it was 10 grand in those days just to get the license. And when you get the helicopter license, you can only fly an R22. If that's what you passed your test in, that's it. That's it. Can't fly anything else. If you wanted to fly a different type of helicopter, you'd have to go and take your test in that. It's called a type rating, and then they stamp it in your license. And if you want to fly a different kind of helicopter, again, you've got to go and get a type rating in that. So you have to pass your test in each type of helicopter. Then you can only fly that type of helicopter. Whereas in a fixed-wing aeroplane, once you pass your test, you can fly anything up to 5,700 kilograms, as long as it's got wheels. It's not a float plane. So you can, in theory, you're licensed to fly something you've never ever flown before, like a tail wheel, and you will kill yourself. You need to do a tail wheel conversion to learn how to handle the tail wheel and learn what all the dangers are of the tail wheel that you don't have in a nose wheel. That's why there's no tail wheels anymore. There's very few. They're enthusiasts to keep old things going, but nobody takes training in a tail wheel anymore. There will be the odd person out there who's done it, just like they did in the old days, tiger moths or something like that. But I went up in a tiger moth once. It was absolutely freezing, and it was really, really slow. And I thought, no, never again. I like tiger moths, don't get me wrong. I think they're great, but I don't want to fly one. I've got one in VR. I fly it in my shorts, my flip-flops. It doesn't get cold at all. I can do everything. I can go everywhere. It's probably more reliable than a real one. And you see all the oil dripping out of them, the big drip tray under the engine. You think, oh my God, it's got an oil leak. And they say, of course it has. It's a tiger moth. It's not dripping oil. There's something drastically wrong with it. Oh, right, okay. And then you get down after a flight and the oil is all the way down the bottom of the fuselage, all down the belly. Right mess everywhere. And you got to keep pouring more and more oil into it every time you want to fly it and start the engine. So there we go. There's a little basic bit of knowledge about aeroplanes and RAF Scampton. Do you know they even cut out the bit with his dog, didn't they? He's had a black dog, and not allowed to say the name because it's politically incorrect. And its grave is here at Scampton somewhere. And they had to cut that bit out of the film, The Dam Busters, because its name caused offence. Black Labrador. That's the times we're living in, isn't it? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.